This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a quiet, insidious failure that's been unfolding for decades, hidden in plain sight. A failure driven by power, resources, and the unchecked desires of those who control them. We've heard the stories before: oil wars, corporate greed, and political posturing. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the real story is something much deeper? A story of systemic failure where the stakes are higher than oil and the cost is far beyond a single regime or a fleeting conflict. The oil companies, the government, the global players pushing, pulling, and profiting behind the scenes. They've made their moves in the dark while we've been distracted by headlines. They've known exactly how to play the game. They've always known what happens next, and you've never been told why. You've been led to believe it's about resources, oil, of course. But what happens when the value of those resources drops? When the money isn't the same and the risk feels too great? What happens when the very system you've relied on starts to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions? This isn't just a question of Venezuela's future. This is a question of the future of global power. And what if I told you it's already in motion? You've heard the names: politicians, oil executives, defense contractors. But none of them have the real power here. The true forces at play are much harder to see. They operate behind closed doors, shaping policy, dictating action, all while remaining in the shadows. It's not about one individual or one group of people. It's about the system. The machinery that moves in the background, far beyond the reach of public scrutiny. This is not a matter of ideology or national interest. This is the economic reality that governs everything. The system controls what happens next, not the decisions of any one person, not even the President of the United States. It's a system built on a single, undeniable truth: control over resources equals control over power. And in the case of Venezuela, the stakes couldn't be higher. The largest oil reserves in the world are in play. But what happens when the oil no longer flows as expected, when market dynamics shift and the risks outweigh the rewards? What happens when those pulling the strings realize their best-laid plans no longer work? This isn't just about Venezuela. It's about the hidden hands behind the system that keeps everything moving. And right now, the system is starting to break. The most dangerous changes don't always come with an explosion. Sometimes they happen quietly, almost unnoticed, over time. Once Venezuela was an undisputed player in the oil game. The United States relied heavily on its reserves, and the companies involved were eager to invest until they weren't. Until that moment, decades ago, when Hugo Chavez made a choice to nationalize Venezuela's oil, to seize control from foreign companies and keep the wealth for his people. It was a bold move, one that rattled the foundation of the oil world. But over time, that move became a silent shift. It wasn't immediate. It didn't bring about a collapse overnight. Instead, it began to erode the very infrastructure that made Venezuela so valuable to the West. As Chavez tightened his grip, those same companies that once flocked to Venezuela pulled away, leaving the oil fields to rot. The infrastructure decayed, and with it, the global appetite for Venezuelan oil began to fade. And yet, here we are, decades later, with the same companies now looking at the same fields, the same executives, once burned by Venezuela's nationalization, now forced to consider the risk again. Only this time, the risk is much greater. What happened? How did we get here? This slow, creeping shift wasn't a sudden shock. It was a gradual erosion of trust and investment, but it's now staring us in the face. And the question is, will it continue to erode, or will it collapse under its own weight? The oil markets are more volatile than they've been in years. Prices are down, supply is up, and the giants who once controlled the flow of oil are now scrambling to find their footing. This isn't a single fluctuation. It's a seismic shift. And the ripple effect is beginning to reach far beyond the boardrooms. Take, for example, the conversation that President Trump had with oil executives. They were asked about the possibility of returning to Venezuela, a country that still holds the world's largest oil reserves. On the surface, it seems like a no-brainer. More oil, more money, right? But instead of jumping at the chance, the response was a resounding no. These companies, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, looked at Venezuela and saw a graveyard of failed investments. They saw facilities in disrepair, the lingering threat of nationalization, and a political environment that was anything but stable. The question here is simple. Why? Why wouldn't they jump at a chance to tap into the world's largest oil reserves? The answer is more complex than you think. The cost of rebuilding what's been lost is just too high. The risks don't add up. And at a time when global oil prices are already under pressure, it's simply not worth it. But that's not the end of the story. If the oil giants won't play ball, who will? The oil companies have long claimed that their only concern is profit. They operate on a simple, cold calculus: risk versus reward. But that's only part of the story. The truth is far more complicated and far more dangerous. You see, the real mechanism isn't just about oil, it's about control. The companies and the government are playing a long game, one where the stakes go beyond crude prices and stock market fluctuations. It's about maintaining influence in a world where access to resources means access to power. Venezuela's oil fields were once a prize. But after Chavez nationalized them, the prize became a poisoned chalice. The companies that had once pumped billions of dollars into the country were left with a mountain of debt, their investments seized by the state, and while Chevron remains there, operating under a special license, the others, they've long since pulled out. Their trust broken, their assets gone. But the system isn't about loyalty, it's about leverage. For the U.S. government, Venezuela's oil remains a critical piece of the geopolitical puzzle. With the companies hesitant to return, the question becomes, can the U.S. force their hand? The answer is yes, but not through direct military action alone. The real power lies in the ability to create instability by using sanctions, by manipulating market conditions, and by making the risk of not participating even more dangerous than the risk of getting involved. In the end, it's not about oil. It's about who controls it and what happens when that control is threatened. The oil giants might be backing off, but that doesn't mean the game is over. In fact, it's just heating up. With Venezuela's oil off the table for most companies, the U.S. government has been quietly shifting its focus. The political pressure is mounting, the sanctions are tightening, and the reality is clear: this isn't about investment anymore. It's about access, about forcing the hand of those who might otherwise hesitate. Look at the sudden surge in political rhetoric. Venezuela's oil is still seen as a lifeline, even if the companies won't touch it. There are whispers of military intervention, and behind those whispers, there's a growing belief that Venezuela's oil might be the trigger for something much larger. The question is, who stands to benefit from this instability? Defense contractors, for one, will always find a way to profit from conflict. But there's another, quieter force in play: the ideological push. The belief that a regime change in Venezuela could be the first domino in toppling other regimes. It's not just about oil, it's about reshaping the political landscape. And while the rhetoric heats up, the oil keeps flowing elsewhere. The pressure is building. And yet, with all these forces in motion, one thing is clear: someone is about to make a move. This is where the story stops being abstract. This is where it starts to matter to you. You might not live in Venezuela, but the consequences of these decisions reach across borders. The effects ripple out, and you feel them in ways you may not even realize. Oil prices don't just affect what's in your tank, they affect everything. The cost of goods, the price of travel, the very stability of economies around the world. The U.S. might think it can play the long game, that it can weather the storm. But what happens when the storm breaks? Look at the communities that have already been devastated by this power struggle. Venezuelans who have lost everything to corruption, political instability, and sanctions. American families who pay more at the pump while the companies make their choices from behind closed doors. People caught in the middle, left to deal with the fallout of decisions made far away by those who will never feel the true consequences. This is no longer just a game of politics and economics. This is about lives. Theirs, yours. And as the pieces move into place, the true human cost is becoming clearer. Who's willing to sacrifice what and for how long? The story doesn't end at Venezuela's borders. It never does. The world is watching, and not just the United States. The geopolitical reverberations of this conflict are being felt everywhere from Europe to the Middle East, from China to Russia. The oil supply chain is a web, and when one strand breaks, it sends shockwaves through every corner of the globe. Consider this. What happens if the U.S. does decide to escalate? What happens if those oil reserves in Venezuela suddenly become a critical point of leverage in a broader geopolitical struggle? It won't just be Venezuela that suffers. It will be the entire global order. We're talking about oil prices skyrocketing, economies teetering on the brink of collapse, and alliances shifting in unpredictable ways. The risk of military intervention, the tightening of sanctions, and the ongoing instability create a perfect storm. But the real question is, will the rest of the world let the U.S. take this step alone? What happens when Russia, China, or even European nations make their own moves? The entire international system is at stake, and with each passing day, the uncertainty grows. This isn't a regional issue anymore. It's a global crisis, and it's unfolding before your eyes. The question isn't whether this conflict will escalate, it's how. There are three possible paths ahead, and each one will change everything. But which one will we follow? That's still in the air. First, there's asterisk, asterisk, adjustment, asterisk, asterisk. The system could recalibrate. Perhaps the oil companies will find a way to invest again, mitigating the risk with new deals, new technologies, or a shift in the market. Perhaps Venezuela, in its desperation, will make concessions that allow for a fragile peace. The tension would still be there, but the situation might stabilize, at least for a time. But would that be enough? Would it solve the root issues or just delay the inevitable? Then there's asterisk, asterisk, erosion, asterisk, asterisk, the slow decay of trust, investment, and stability. This could drag on for years, slowly eating away at the global oil market, destabilizing not just Venezuela, but the wider geopolitical balance. The oil will still flow, but at a cost. Nations will make new alliances, but they'll be built on shaky ground. Economic systems will weaken, and the pressure will continue to mount. This path leads to a deeper fracture, one that could last a generation. Finally, there's asterisk, asterisk, rupture, asterisk, asterisk. A full breakdown either through military intervention or total collapse. A conflict so catastrophic that it tears apart more than just Venezuela's borders. Global oil markets would spiral, sanctions would escalate, and the risk of regional and even global instability would become all but certain. This is the least desirable path, but it's a very real possibility. So, which future will we live through? Adjustment, erosion, or rupture? The answer, as always, depends on the next move. You're left with a choice. Do you think this system will bend or break? You've seen the pieces, the players, the mechanisms at work. The oil companies, the governments, the global forces moving behind the scenes, all of them shaping the future in ways that affect you, whether you realize it or not. The decisions made today will echo for years to come. Will Venezuela's oil remain locked behind a wall of sanctions and failed investments, or will the world see the next great conflict unfold in real time? Can the system adjust to the pressure, or will it finally crack under the weight of its own contradictions? The tension is only rising, and the clock is ticking. One thing is certain: the choices made in the coming weeks, months, and years will have consequences. And the question remains, how far are we willing to let it go? The answer is out there, but to truly understand it, you need to keep watching, because the story isn't over yet. Asterisk, asterisk, keep asking, keep questioning, stay tuned. Asterisk, asterisk.